think the first thing I'd like to say is go back to a memory that I have of my friend Melli Gobhai, who was one of India's greatest painters. But when he was in New York, he also wrote and illustrated children's books. And
Right.
one of the things that his agent told him, which he often quoted to me, was in a picture book for children, especially, the last words on any page must leave the child thinking, what happened next? What are you going to say next? There has to be some sense of, literally, you have to create each book with each page with the intention of creating a page turner. That the child must want to turn the page and go on to the next page. I can't say that I've always kept this in mind, because I don't actually, because see, Melli was an even more unique combination, which was he was a writer and illustrator, which means he knew exactly how he was going to lay out the page, he knew what words would go on to it, and he knew how he could use those words in combination with those images in order to make the child ask that question, what happens next? Okay, so having said that, now all of us are not that gifted. Some of us have, like a gift for words, some of us have a gift for images, and when the gift for words and images comes together, and there is some kind of symbiosis between them, or give and take between them, then there is a great children's picture book can be created. So I often think it is very sad that, we tend to see illustrating as the secondary job. Like, there is written by Jerry Pinto, illustrated by Sheena Devaya, and as if like, that was only part of the deal, and maybe like not as important. I think that's really sad, because there are two things that the illustrator does which are absolutely mind-blowing. Which is, the first is that they must imagine a world, and they must bring that world which is really luminous, in the sense, anything that is inside your head is probably in 3 dimensions. It probably has color, sight, sound. It has texture. It has smell. Say, for instance, in the book that I've just been looking at, which Shinibali sent me, which Kripa Bhatia did for me on Melli again, which is, it has a beautiful moment where the two characters are walking through a wood. And as I looked at that picture, I was cast back into birdsong, into the rich smell of, of Godhuli, of mud, of petrichor, the smell of mud after rain. Now, all that comes out of the illustration. It's all also inside the illustrator's head when he's drawing, and it must be pared down and suggested by what you have put on the page. So there is a possibility of creating a meta-narrative, of creating an alternative, parallel, side-by-side narrative to the words. And that would enhance the book thrice as much. It makes it even more powerful if some element of the illustrator's personality leaks into the drawing and is allowed to leak. As far as translation for children goes, I think it's really, I think writing for children starts with the difficulty of that blasted word list. Because the word list that we have for age groups and we have for who knows what, it's a very useful tool. I have no problems with it. But I do understand that there is also a moment when the writer feels constrained by it, but the translator feels constrained by it. Because often when you're translating, you'll find the perfect word, okay, that has the right number of syllables, especially if you're doing a poem, that has the right number of syllables, that has the right number of beats, that has the right sound. You may be looking for a word with lots of N's because the N sound gives you a musical tonality. Or you might have, you may be looking for an M sound for words with M sounds, because M sounds give you a nice murmuring quality. Or you might be looking for S sounds, which create waves and sea and soothing. Or you may be looking for D's and T's and D's and Th's, because those give you a wonderful clippity cloppity rhythm when you want to actually do something rhythmic. Now, then if that word that you have found with such difficulty suddenly doesn't fit into the list, you begin to get really, really quite annoyed. And then you think to yourself, why am I writing for children? Why don't I just drop this whole thing and do something for adults? But I want to say this for Pratham, and I want to say this for all people who write for children. There is something very, very special about doing this work, however difficult it is, and however, it's almost unrewarding, right? I mean, there is no Booker Prize for children's writing. I don't think a Nobel Prize winner for literature has ever been a children's writer. I would give it to at least 10 children's writers that I know over so many of the Nobel laureates that have been given prizes. Because what we are doing is, when there are books for children, sight lines and thought lines are being created in the child's imagination. The child is being taught to think about words as magic and as mystery. Because the magic and mystery of words, we tend to forget that, those few letters with spaces and punctuation marks in between them conjure up worlds for the child. And they learn to think, to dream, to imagine, to empathize, to ponder, to argue. Children often argue with a book. I have children who come up to me and say, this book is very thin. I would have liked it to be fatter, which is a nice compliment, because actually what they're saying is, I wanted to go on for longer. So when we are doing that, when you're writing for children, you're writing for children with a much larger project in mind. The project of creating the empathetic human being, this human being with values, the human being with beliefs, the human beings with all the skill sets and mindsets that we want. And it is very important for us to forget this. We must forget it when we are writing for children. It is only if you start by thinking, this is the important and valuable work that I'm doing, you immediately become self-important. Okay, the golden rule for translating things that are in rhyme is not rhyme. It's music.
Okay.
You need to remember that often in the attempt to get a rhyme in the right place, you will violate the music and the inherent logic of the language by twisting it all about. Crosswords do a very great damage to poetry, because crosswords always have some words that they will say before in poetic language, and that is air. And then you feel like you have to say an air, E-R-E, air shilling. It's nothing like that. There is no language that is poetic language, and there is no language that is unpoetic language. There is only language that has been set to good music and language that has not been set to music. Language that has been set to music is poetry. Language that has not been set to music is not poetry. It's as simple as that. So when you are translating a poem, find the music. Find the music of the original poem by reading it aloud, reading it again and again, reading it until you almost know it by heart, and then write the poem again. And find the music in the language that you are writing in. So both musics are important, but they are not going to be the same music. Now, when you are taking a story to your language, remember that there are 90% of your readership is Chennai. Will understand Chennai, but 10% will be Tamilian children living in Canada, will be Tamilian children living in Switzerland, will be Tamilian children living in America, who have bought Pratham books or been given Pratham books as gifts or reading them online or whatever. So the bargain is going to be a bargain that you are going to have to strike every day. You cannot mandate it. You cannot say this is too local or that is not local enough. You're going to have to each time, okay, say for instance, the word Bhelpuri comes up, right? And say Bhelpuri is classic snack food of Bombay, and you have a story in which there's Bhelpuri. Dadima is taking her son out or her grandson out and, like giving him Bhelpuri on the street. Is that what they eat in Chennai? No. They in Chennai, I think you probably right now, wherever I go in the country, it seems to be like there is one stand which says Bombay Bhelpuri. But they probably go and eat something else on the street. I don't know what, but whatever they eat. Are you making a huge mistake if you take out Bhelpuri? Only if it is something to do, there is a metaphor in the Bhelpuri.
Right.
If the Dadima is then going to say, look, see, in the Bhelpuri we have rice that was probably grown in Bihar. We have save that the chana probably came from Maharashtra. These mangoes were grown in the Konkan. That imli came from wherever. And she's talking like that. Then if you change Bhelpuri, you're changing something vital. But if it is just about showing that a Dadima took her grandchild out and gave her or him a treat on the street, and that caused a problem because the next day there was a tummy upset or whatever else you want to say, that's all right, you can change it. I think no writer is so attached to their Bhelpuri that they would complain. And no reader is ever going to say, oh, but in the original it's Bhelpuri and here you made it idli chutney or whatever you made. So your negotiation, okay, so when you make a change, okay, every change you must have a reason for what you did. If you have a reason for what you did, if you have a thought, if you have a clearly enunciated thought about what you did, that is the best thing you can do. That is your responsibility to think it through, and then you're fine.